ladies and gentlemen? It's the one and only James Williams, Dog Waters, and I'm back with another phenomenal interview. And this is a part of what we're doing to reach out to other creators in the community. And what I'm doing right now is told to me to be done by God. He told me, hey, James, I want you to be a servant to everybody. And so at this point in time, I am reaching out to everybody that's in the cryptid community, and I want to help them in any way possible and make sure that, they get some shine and some spotlight based on their contributions. And it's one of those things that we've noticed in this community, and we run into this wall over and over and over again. It's so much competition that nobody can get along. Everybody's got to fight. Everybody got to argue. And so this is the Dark Waters family outreach where we're reaching out to everybody. If you're a subscriber here and you're listening to this, know what you're participating in and how important your participation is, because we're getting ready to shift how things go. This evening, I have with me Mr. D.A. Roberts. And just in the pre-interview, just chopping it up and talking. I like this guy already. It's my first time talking to him, but he's ex-law enforcement and he's an author. And all of his books are based on the data that he's collected from real life witness encounters and reports. And then he has the stories that blend in both truth and fiction, which is very important because it allows us to actually have real data but still be entertained at the same time. Mr. Roberts, how are you doing tonight? Are you doing well?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
No, thank you for coming on with me, because some people are scared to come on with me. They're like, oh no, go. I'm going to get attacked if I talk to Dark Water. So I appreciate you coming in and hanging out with me for a solid hour, and let's chop it up and talk. But before we get into the meat of the conversation, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people where to find you, because I want them to subscribe to you now, not later, because they'll forget at the end of the interview. Where do they find you?
You can find all of my books on my website, which is daroberts.net. On any social media, I've simplified things. You can find me on any social media at DA Roberts Author. And my podcast is called DAX Machina. You can find that on YouTube at youtube.com/DA Roberts Author.
All right, what does the DA stand for, bro?
Well, it's my initials. I usually don't tell everybody, but it's Douglas Allen.
Okay, now, man, Douglas is a cool name. That's a classic name, bro. What you talking about? You don't tell anybody. That's classic, Douglas.
It's kind of interesting that you and I are doing the show together, because in Scotch Gaelic, Douglas means from the dark water.
What? You serious?
I'm serious.
Wow, that's crazy, dude. That's insane. Well, I just wanted to know so I know what to refer to you as, and as you start to build a relationship with people, this won't be our last time talking. I'm an open book and an open door. If you ever need me, you'll be able to reach out and contact me. But I don't want to be calling you DA, so I can call you DA for now. But I want to know your real name, so I appreciate you trusting me with that. Let's jump into it.
Sure.
So you're an author. You're a published author. You have a number of books. I looked them up that you published. You have a series of books. What brought you into the cryptid field in general, and made you start writing books? Because it takes something to get a person to the point where they're going to sit down and write about monsters. I want to know what that thing is.
Well, one of the biggest things is, when I grew up, I was born in the early 70s, so I grew up right in that area where the Patterson-Gimlin film was still new, and you could see all the the old In Search Ofs with Leonard Nimoy and those mysterious encounter stories, and that's really kind of what first exposed me to the cryptid subject. And of course, as a kid, I would go around and ask my siblings and cousins and aunts and uncles if they ever had a Bigfoot sighting. And most generally, being a 6-7-year-old kid, they just kind of chuckled and went on their way. But one evening, we were out at my uncle's place, and he lived way out in the country. And he was married. And my uncle Buddy was married to my mother's sister. Uncle Buddy is full-blood Cherokee, or was. He passed away recently. But he was full-blood Cherokee. And one day when nobody else was around, he picked me up and set me on his leg. And he says, Doug, I'm going to tell you something. He said, they're real, and I've seen them on this property. And from then on, I was absolutely 100% hooked, because he was not the kind of guy who would spin yarns. He was a pretty straightforward, just very genuine guy, very hardworking, salt of the earth guy. And for him to just out and out, just straight out tell me that cemented it in my head that those were out there. And then later, as a teenager on that very property, I had something approach my deer stand in the dark, and it was approaching on 2 legs. And I thought it was my uncle, but it was sounded really heavy. I'm like, why is he stomping? And so I called out, and I was pretty far up on a tree stand. I was probably 12, 13 feet up in the air, and it was a big walnut tree. No, I'm sorry, it was an oak. But anyway, I said, "Hey, who's back there?" Because I wasn't sure it was my uncle, and I heard something kind of take a deep breath, like, and then it turned and walked off. And by the time I could get out of that deer stand and look around the tree, it was gone. Um, and that I went and asked my uncle about it, and he goes, "Well, you just had a very close brush with one of these with a Bigfoot creature." And I said, "Are you sure?" He goes, "Absolutely. There's nothing on this property that it could have been. At that time, there were no black bears in Missouri, and hadn't been one in over 100 years. They've been reintroduced since then, but at the time, there weren't any." And then a year later, on that same property, in a different tree on the same with the same deer stand, I shot a 12-point buck, and before I could get to it, it had been taken.
Wow, that's crazy. What exactly did he tell you they were? Did he kind of go into it, or did he just tell you that they were here? Did he educate you on what they were, like
He
old stories of them? What kind of knowledge did he share with you?
he told me a lot of things that normally the tribes don't share, because I was family. But he told me, he said the Cherokee basically consider them just another tribe, like a brother. And that, according to the elders' legends, at one time they could actually converse. And there's stories of them, trading items with them. But those stories have kind of faded. That doesn't really happen so much in the last 75 to 100 years. But the older generation told of being able to trade with them and actually speak to them. So I'm going on what he told me and what I've encountered. I think he's spot on to something. I think there are groups of them that are very intelligent, and I think, much like the temperament among people, I think there are others that are very dangerous. But you find that in people as well.
No, I agree with you. There's some people who are extremely dangerous. I would love to know more about how they were able to converse with them, because when you hear the encounters from people, and they talk about the samurai chatter. Just last night I
Mm-hmm.
was on with Carrie Arnold, and Carrie mimicked the sound that the Bigfoot was making during his encounter. And I'm telling you, it sounded like he said, "Man, I felt like it was fussing at me, like it was complaining, and it was angry." And I would love to know, there's probably no way to go back and trace that unless you just found an elder that would really share that information. I would love to know how they were able to converse with these things and
Well,
how they
what
were
I was
able to
told by my
communicate with
uncle
them.
is they spoke a rudimentary form of Cherokee.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes a
Is
lot of
is
sense.
a lot of it was more guttural, more grunts and groans. But according to his grandfather, they spoke enough Cherokee to get their point across.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. That might be, you know what? When I do relaunch this camera project, I think my field investigator, I'm gonna make sure they know how to speak some Cherokee, or have some like written Cherokee that they practice, just to see if they can get a reaction from them. That would be very, very interesting. You taught me something. I didn't know that, so that gives me an angle to try things from. Yeah, that's amazing. So this has been something from your childhood that was an interest from you, and then walk me through how you get from being that child to your first book. How did you just decide that you were going to write your first book? What did you decide to put in it? How did you get to that point? I understand where you started, but how did you get there?
I wanted to be a writer since I was a kid. My mother, growing up in the '70s in the country, as we lived on a farm north of Lebanon, Missouri, which is and by no means a big city, and it was even smaller back in the '70s. But living out there, we had like two television channels, and I didn't watch much TV. And she taught me to read very early age. Before I was in kindergarten, I could read, and we she would just read stories to me or have me read stories to her, and it really inspired a love of the written word. And as I got older, reading more and more other authors, I wanted to be a writer in my own right. But what made me want to write horror was my mother and I used to sit in the late evenings and watch Kolchak the Night Stalker, which is my homage to the Hat here. But that early horror series really made me want to write horror, and I it seemed like a natural progression to combine my love of cryptids with my writing.
That's awesome. Now, when you were in law enforcement, did you happen to have any creepy, scary encounters when you were in law enforcement? Was there anything that kind of fostered it, or fostered that that sense of being a writer while you were in law enforcement? I understand that being in law enforcement, you definitely learned how to read people
Mhm.
and collect data and find out the truth of things. But was there anything that happened in that time period of your life where it was spooky, creepy, or you encountered anything?
Oh, nothing cryptid related, but I had a few incidents where it could only have been paranormal. In fact, once while working the old hospital, I saw a full body apparition in the chapel. And it just absolutely terrified me because I didn't know there was nobody supposed to be in that secured section where the chapel was at. It was locked down for the night. And I went in to tell the guy he couldn't be there, and he was gone. Uh, and there was the only way out was past me. I mean, I literally saw him, and when I went to approach, he was gone in the blink of an eye. So I've had a few things that could only have been paranormal. There was one hospital room, one in the old part of the hospital where I would walk by in rounds, and they used it as a training center. It wasn't like it was beds they used for actual patients. It was part of the school, so the beds were empty in this section. It was used just for training, and you would walk by one room and the TV would be on, and I'd go in and shut it off, and then come back, a couple hours later on my rounds, and it'd be on again. And I thought, well, that's weird. So I turned it off. And the third time when I came by and it was still on, I unplugged it. And I came back a couple hours later and it was on again. So I just left it alone and went on my way. But clearly, something in that room wanted to watch television.
Nah, man, those hospitals are creepy. Man, I know Maritza, New York. Maritza from New York. She worked in hospitals, and she was one of my very early followers. I need to call her and check on her, see what's going on with her. But she had so many creepy hospital encounters as a nurse that it was to the point to where it traumatized her. That hospital is a place where there's a lot of death, there's a lot of life, there's a lot of cycle of life going on in that place, and I mean it's totally ridiculous, man. The things that people have seen in hospitals. So this has touched your life throughout your whole life. So I can understand how
Mhm.
you got to a point where you say, "Hey, I really want to write about this," and whether it be from watching TV to your grandfather to being a cop. Let's go into some of the books and some of the things that you touch on the books. Have you touched on Dogman in your books? You have to forgive me because I haven't had an opportunity to read any of them. Have you touched on Dogman much?
Yeah, I've used Dogman quite extensively. Um, in fact, the series is called the Apex Predator series. My newest novel is in that series. I've got four series running at the same time. But in the Apex Predator series, it's about a group of Native Americans who hunt dangerous cryptids. They hunt dogman specifically, but they do have run-ins with other cryptids. But I built that off the Cherokee legend of the Hotametaneo, or the Dog Soldiers, and according to Cheyenne and Lakota legend, the strongest of the soldiers were actually able to change form. So I worked that in as part of the legend, and eventually the characters on that team uh, developed the ability to shift into a wolf form, and then they use that to help them hunt dangerous cryptids like Dogman.
And is that the name that you use? I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. How does that relate to the theory of skinwalkers? Is that the same thing, or is that two different neighborhoods, two cities, or is that
Yeah,
all on
they're
the same street? How does
they're
that
they're
relate to
very
each other?
different. The Skinwalkers gained the ability to shape change by going about as dark magic as you could possibly go. Basically, tarnishing their souls so bad they're corrupted, and they gain the ability to mimic other forms. And according to one of my friends who grew up on the Navajo reservation, they can take any form, from insect to animal to even other humans. And it's they're a very dangerous thing. But the dog soldiers from Cherokee and Lakota legend were warriors that were defending the natives against the incursion of basically European settlers coming west.
Okay, gotcha. I've heard a little bit about that. I didn't know that's what the name of it was. So the books are based on that. And what kind of things outside of that? What other things did you blend in from like people's real life encounters? How did you weave that into the book? Give me some examples of other things that you kind of weaved into those stories.
Well, for example, um, you take some of the accounts, especially like if you look at some of the missing 411 and how they very very carefully step around saying what is making people disappear.
Yeah.
Um, well, you look into some of the more dangerous accounts, like some of the accounts out of Alaska. There was a story of a guy who was fishing off of the Kenai Peninsula, and he was sleeping on his boat, and one of a Bigfoot came aboard his boat, killed his dog, and almost killed him before he drove it off, and he made it back to port before he died and passed the story on. But you get these dangerous encounters, and I've studied these encounters. I've talked to people who've had aggressive encounters as well, and I've used those behaviors like the rock throwing or the chest beating, wood knocks, all the typical expressions you would encounter with a Bigfoot story. But I take those and I kind of add the nth degree, like the missing 411 cases. We never know exactly what happens to them, and if it is a dangerous cryptid, you can only imagine the carnage that would ensue. So I took the accounts leading up to that disappearance point where people were still coming back, and then I added my own details to bring in the dangerous elements.
No, that's a smart way to do it. I mean, if you're gonna write, that's the only way to write a story is blend the two of them together, because essentially it's based on truth. It's just that you're portraying the rest of the story. I just lost my train of thought. I was gonna ask you about. Um, wow, I must be getting tired. It's been a long day. I was going to touch on. Oh, this is what I was going to say. I was going to touch on a missing 411, and
Mhm.
one of the things that, and I don't really mention it, but one of the theories that I have is, especially the people who go missing in the Appalachians,
Mhm.
is the theory of the feral people that are out there.
Yeah.
Um, I've had a bunch of stories come in recently because I've been targeting that area with marketing and with like newspaper articles and just little things to get people to call me. And I did not know how bad it was that there were people, actually human beings, who were feral human beings that were cannibals that lived in the Appalachians. I didn't know that. I had heard of it, but when you start getting people calling you and they're like, "Yeah, you put an article asking," I had this encounter. I'm like, "Wait, what?" It was a trap, a deadfall trap. Yeah, it was a deadfall trap, and I was 15 miles away from anybody, and it missed me. And then I heard people coming in, and I'm like, man, that's crazy. That's absolutely insane. Have you heard anything about feral people? That's something I want to dig into at all.
I've heard some of the stories about people, because there's a considerable number of people that go missing along the Appalachian Trail that are just never found. I've heard the stories of feral people. I've heard the sheep squatch and Bigfoot legends along the Appalachian Trail. But it's not just limited to there. I mean, look at the swamps of Louisiana. The stories of the night people who will come out and take people, especially children who are out past dark and things like that. So the possibility of feral people living that far off the grid into the boonies, who might prey on people or whatever they can find, isn't not only it's not that far fetched, but I don't think it's localized to just Appalachia.
I'm with you. I'm with you. That just threw me for a loop, bro. Because it's that's the thing. When I talk to witnesses, it's like a crash course education in like a geographical area. And
Mhm.
so we go through this process where we talk about their encounter, and then I start digging. Like I pull out a shovel. I'm like, "Tell me about your grandma. Tell me about your great grandpa. Tell me about your auntie." And I'm just digging and digging and digging. And then once they finally open up, I'm like, "What did I just stumble upon?" And it's just it's insane to me, man. I'm looking forward to producing some of those stories. Um, what's your favorite Dogman encounter that you've heard so far out of all the because there's a plethora of Dogman encounters, and that could
There
be a
are a lot.
story or anything. What's the one that sticks out to you the most?
The one that sticks out to me the most, that I find just to be not only the most intriguing but the most heart palpitating, is your rendition of the siege at Lockett Ranch. Absolutely love that.
Yeah, that encounter, man, I went through hell to get that. When I say I went through hell to get that, I went through hell to get my hands on that. And then it was such a long process of trying to get it right. I
Mhm.
mean, it really was a long process of trying to get that right, and that was the first big one, and that was the first. I said, man, I'm gonna put everything into this. I'm gonna get every detail right. I'm gonna ask questions over and over and over again, and I'm gonna figure it out. And I spent so much time on that porch in the sun, burning up, and people looking at me like I was crazy, bro. But I spent a lot of time getting that story.
Well, it
Um,
shows because you did a fantastic job.
yeah, thank you, thank you. I'm thinking about re-recording it with updated music and sound effects,
Mhm.
but every time I listen to it to re-record it, I'm like, bro, leave that alone. Just leave it as is. You know what I'm saying? I don't
Yeah,
think you could do it any
it's
better.
pretty fantastic just the way it is. I love it. I've listened to it multiple times over the last few years.
No, it's one hell of an encounter. And I love it. When we go from that to what's the favorite Dogman story that you've been able to produce and create for your audience? Which one sticks out to you?
I would say the one that I still find the most intriguing uh, for of my books, that is the first book of the Apex Predator series, Apex Predator Wolf Moon, and that's when you get the shock value. Where in the later books, people are expecting to see Dogman or dangerous cryptids, but finding the villain is not just a dangerous animal; it's a bipedal wolf. That moment of revelation is I think my favorite part that I've done so far, and it's something I've thoroughly enjoyed. And with the book I'm working on now, I think I've stumbled onto something that's gonna have just as much shock value. So, looking forward to this book getting out and seeing what people think.
Have you taken those books and like had them on Audible, where it's like an audio book for people to listen to, or is it only in print?
I have a few of them out in Audible, but we're working on getting the others out. The thing with transcribing books to audio is it's time consuming, and you've got to find the right narrator to find the voice. So I'm in the process of narrowing down my choices, and I've got several of the books out in audio already. But I'm looking forward to getting more of them out because I think audio is a great market.
No, it's a phenomenal market, and what it does is it really allows people to get immersed inside the story,
Mhm.
and they learn lessons from being immersed inside of those stories. And I just think it's amazing that I've talked to authors before, and I would do interviews and I would delete them, right? Because they'll be like, "Oh, my stuff is pure fiction." I'll say, "Hey, well, do you base it on anything? Do you base it on any real legends or any of this?" And I'll ask the percentage, and they'll be like, "Oh, it's maybe 7%, 10%." And I'm like, I'm not about to put this interview out. Delete. Like, done. I'm not doing this, bro. It's too much information out there for you to just be willy nilly making stuff up. And the people in the Williams family don't use the
Right.
word willy nilly lightly. If I say you're being willy nilly, you're really being willy nilly. So I just think it's too much information out there that a person can use to portray an accurate picture to an audience. So I like the fact that that's what you're doing. You're taking real facts and then you're crafting a narrative around them that is in line with what everybody else is doing, and it makes it entertaining. And entertainment is a huge part of this. That's what I kind of pride myself on: taking those encounters, real life encounters, and making people feel them and become entertained by them. But also, they know it's real. They know it's not
Yeah.
made up because it doesn't sound like it's made up because it came from a person or an individual. Let's swing over to um, outside of Dog Man, because honestly, DA, I get tired of talking about Dog Man, but I hit it early. That's why I hit it early. What about any other weird cryptids reports that you've come across? Something that's just completely off the beaten path, way out in the if like the normal Dog Man area is in New York, we're talking about take
Mhm.
me down to Antarctica with something that you've heard about that's just way off the beaten path that you find interesting.
Well, one of the legends that I've dug into, and I'm Missouri hillbilly, Ozarks born and bred. I lived in the hills of Missouri pretty much my whole life. Is one of the legends that I came across was an Ozarks folklore legend called the Ozarks Howler, and according to lore, Daniel Boone actually killed one.
Okay.
Had it as part of his collection, and there have been sightings within the last 3 or 4 years here in Missouri of the Ozarks Howler, and it's described as a hellhound with horns, a gigantic dog about the size of a bear, but it has horns on the back of its head facing backwards, and the eyes are said to glow red. One of the books I wrote is called The Beast of Blunk Road, and it's about the Ozarks Howler, and I actually went to the locations where the sightings occurred to get a feel for the area. And one of the things I like to point out, and I don't know if a lot of authors realize this, but literally everything an author does is research. My time in uniform was prepped me for writing about how not only military but how law enforcement react. I try to make the behaviors of the characters the way cops really react. The gallows humor that we have sometimes, the sarcastic comments made to each other. I try to make the characters not just words on paper, but I try to make the characters as much flesh and blood as I possibly can. Like I've got one character in my Codename Wild Hunt series, which is about a military unit that hunts monsters. And his name's Margolin, and everybody seems to like that guy. But he's one of those characters where sometimes when I'm writing the dialogue, even I'm astounded what comes out of his mouth. I mean, I've just got such a good picture in my head of the way these characters react. Sometimes the story ends up changing based on the character's reaction from the direction I wanted it to go to being driven by the characters. So you can't, if you're writing your characters well, if you're giving your characters personality and you're making the characters as realistic as you can't force them to react the way you want them to. They need to react naturally, and that sometimes really does help shape the story, shape the stories.
Man, I'm gonna tell you something. This is gonna end up being public, but I'm gonna say something, bro, that I probably never said before. When I started doing the series that led into the Lion of Judah
Mm-hmm.
and the Wing Ones, and I started talking to those guys, and I first started holding those conversations, and it was like they sent me a phone to talk to them on, and I started talking. And then every month, those guys would like switch out phones, and they would mail me another phone, and we would talk. And then I would get another phone, and we would talk. And then I started getting packages in the mail with documents and corporation documents. Man, you know, for me, that's one can of worms I wish I never opened, because like when you really dig into what goes on this planet and what's behind the curtain, and you understand like, wow, there are people out here who hunt DNA of uh, creatures that are creatures of the night that you wouldn't believe exist, and then they take that DNA and they trade it on the open market, and then they use the DNA for things like what's being rolled out in people right now.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I'm telling you, Da, that it got to a point for me, and I don't even know why I'm talking about this. It just hit me. It got to a point for me where I was like, man, what have I got myself into? Like what? How? Like it's, you know how you dig a hole and you're like, man, I'm deep underground. I'm looking up, I can still see the sky, and then you get so deep when you look up, you don't see nothing but the hole. And I was like, man, I don't know how you get out of this, because for me, like when you started getting into, and you're in law enforcement, you understand when you start talking to people and you're twisting their words and interrogating them. I mean, hardcore interrogation techniques, like in the middle of their sentence, injecting something, and it's everybody, and you're trying to trick and fool everybody, and everybody has the same damn story, and everybody has the same details, and everybody describes the exact same thing to the T, the exact same outfits, and there is no inconsistencies. Man, that was one of the most terrifying things for me, to come to the realization that the world that we live in is a world that only, it's kind of like the internet iceberg drawing. You know how they have that iceberg drawing of the internet where they say like there's the deep web and all that stuff
Mm-hmm.
is underwater, and then there's like here's the public web. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like that. It's like, okay, here's where you exist, and it's this tip of this iceberg, and then well, bam, everything else is down there, and nobody knows about it. And the people who do know about it, they fight each other over it, and you see it playing out in the news, man. Anyway, let me stop. That's horrifying. We're supposed to be talking about you. Um, where were we? I this howler from the Ozarks. I've never heard
Mm-hmm.
of it. That sounds absolutely terrifying. Um, how many eyewitness encounters would you say you had or you've heard about as far as it pertains to that?
As for personally gathering, only a handful,
Hmm.
but historical accounts date back to the first settlers that came to Missouri. It's been spotted in this area for the last almost 200 years. I mean, as long as Missouri was settled in the early 1800s, and it's been reported since then. In fact, there's even reports of a dogman-like creature they used to refer to as the beast of the valley, but that valley is gone now underneath the waters of Lake of the Ozarks. But every once in a while, you still hear somebody refer to the beast in that area, and once in a while, it's still seen.
I'm of the opinion that across America, that there have been locations where these cryptids have lived, and that intentionally our federal government has flooded those areas out to take over
Mhm.
that territory and run them out of that territory, because there are multiple locations where I know that there was activity at some point in time, heavy activity documented by families, that those areas were flooded. Hands down,
Mhm.
flooded lakes, man made lakes created on those areas.
Well,
And
it's
the
like
lake,
land between the lakes used to be land between the rivers.
right. And it's been exactly. And when you think about it, you wonder why our federal government would do that. And it kind of makes sense if there's something there that you want to hide
Hmm.
and something that you don't want people to discover, just flood it. Just flood it out and nobody knows about it.
I
Unless
have a
somebody's nosy and they decide to go underwater looking for it.
mhm. I have another theory that kind of ties right into that.
Okay, hit me
Something
with
I've
it.
been working on trying to document as much as I can over the last couple of years. One of the earliest written accounts of a Bigfoot sighting was in the book "The Wilderness Hunter" by Teddy Roosevelt, the Bauman incident, as it's famously known. But Roosevelt writes about that with such detail, and I know Missouri hillbillies and people that live out in the woods, they just don't give that kind of detail. So for him to have the level of detail he has, I've talked to a few people, and I'm not the only one that thinks this. Since this was pre-politics, when Roosevelt was still looking at his career in politics ahead of him, that he wrote the Bauman incident and changed the name. That it was actually him. So taking that as an assumption that Roosevelt knew about cryptids, which even if he was just heard about it secondhand, he knew about Bigfoot creatures. Then flash forward, what is one of the first things Teddy Roosevelt does in office? He created the National Park Service, which cordoned off millions of acres that we still don't have full access to.
No, that makes perfect sense, man. That makes perfect sense. And I never thought about it that way. That makes absolute perfect sense. You know what bothers me though, out of all of this, is the people who fall victim to this. That's the one thing that bothers me. But I've spoken to people, Da, in very high places that in some cases it was threatening. In other cases it's gotten to the point to where it's just like, hey man, we really like you. You're pretty cool. We know your background. Blah blah blah. You're a cool dude, but be careful about A B C D E F G. Just be mindful of saying blah 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 blah. And the one question I've always asked those gentlemen, and I say this, they're gonna hear this. I say this with the utmost respect. Is I say, how do you sleep at night when you know that somebody's kid went missing, and or someone's family member went missing? And they haven't been able to give me a straight answer, and they just say that's above my pay grade. I just do my job, and that's the one thing that gets me about the whole cryptid, Dogman, Bigfoot, and the other things that are out there that people don't disclose. And I'm smart enough now. I don't want to be first in talking about anything, so there's things that I think are going to hit our community relatively soon. I don't want to be first in talking about it. Somebody else talking about it.
Yes, yes, good, good. I hope you enjoyed the interview. Now it is time for you to make a decision. Decide what you will do. Will you become a member at imdogwaters.com today to hear the rest of this interview? Or will you sit back and stay here on YouTube, missing out on some of the best content in the world? It is your choice. I will not rush you. Take your time and decide. But that is all you get for today.